Okay, welcome in. It is Tuesday morning, so I will be reviewing Week 13's action from the National Hockey League. Not the National Hockey League, National Football League. There we go. So all 32 teams played this past weekend, whether it was Thursday, Friday, or Sunday, or Monday. 4 days of football. I wish we got 4 days of football every week. That would be fantastic. But it was American Thanksgiving this past weekend, so a belated Thanksgiving to you, I guess, if that makes any sense. So heading into this week, for my predictions, I had 121 games correct and 58 incorrect. So I'm still well above 500, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I think I did pretty okay with Week 13's picks. I will, at the end of the video, I will review and see how I did, but I was very impressed, to say the least. So as I said at the very beginning, it was American Thanksgiving, and with that being said, there's always a minimum of 3 games on Thursday, and it seems with last year, maybe the year before, they started having Black Friday games. I think last year was the first one they did, and then they had one this year, and I'll get into that game very, very shortly. So we had a battle in the NFC North with the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions. I did predict that Detroit would win. They did narrowly. 23-20 would be the final score. There's 2 things that I take away from this game. One was how Detroit let Chicago get back in the game, because I'm pretty sure at halftime they're up 16-0. They were on the verge of scoring late in that first half. Then they had the fumble. Chicago recovered it, and then Chicago ended up building momentum. So for the Lions, they're very lucky that this game that they were able to get the win. With that being said, the Bears, awful play calling at the end. I've seen so many different reviews. I've even made my own little video of myself. As soon as that game was done, I went on a great big rant about how terrible the play calling was, the decision making was. When you have over 30 seconds left of the game and you're trying to just tie the game, you have a timeout to use. I'm not a coach, but use the timeout. If you use the timeout with 30 seconds to play, you have a chance to come up with a plan to at least gain some yards. Now, at that point, it was like 3rd and 26, so you're not going to gain all 26 yards back in one play. But at least if they had gotten 10 yards or whatever the case may be they could have attempted a field goal to tie the game up and send it into overtime. But bad decision, bad play calling, ended up leading to a last-second Hail Mary, and the pass fell incomplete. And needless to say, the next day, the Chicago coach was fired. I wasn't surprised about that move at all, but it's just been it was a bad season to begin with, and that definitely was the icing on the cake when it came to management making up their mind. Okay, the Dallas Cowboys took on their NFC East rival. Well, I mean, you can call it a rival, but the Giants have sucked for so many years that it's hard to say if you always beat that team, are they really a rival? The game was closer than I thought. I honestly didn't pay that much attention to this game, but it was closer than I thought. I did predict that Dallas would get the win. 27-20 would be the final score, so it was a closer game than a lot of people thought, but I'm kind of ashamed that I missed it. But either way, so I started off 2-0 so far. The late game, it was the Sunday night game, but it was on a Thursday, so the Miami Dolphins went into Green Bay to take on the Packers. I did predict that Green Bay would win, and they did. 30-17 would be the final score. So I will take a look at the standings here as soon as I'm done doing my review to see where teams are at. And I know there have been some teams that were eliminated this past weekend. So for Thursday, I was perfect, 3-0. The Friday game, which was the Black Friday game, took place in the AFC West as we had the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. I ended up watching this game, only one game, so I was like, what the hell, why not? And I did predict that Kansas City would win. I thought it was going to be a blowout. I honestly did, but because of how poorly and how the Chiefs have been narrowly getting away with victories, I'm not surprised this was a 19-17 game. And for the second day in a row, there ended up being some controversial at the end when the Raiders were trying to push for a late field goal which would have won it. They ended up not only fumbling the ball on their last possession, but then they had a holding call on their center, if not mistaken. So both those things went against them, and the Chiefs obviously just had to kneel the ball down. So they narrowly escaped with a victory. They can't keep doing this, can they? There's no way they can play like this the rest of the season and the playoffs and try to get back into a Super Bowl position. There's no way they can get away with that. Can they? So I started off 4-0 between the Thursdays and the Fridays matchups. Sunday, the Atlanta Falcons were playing host to the Los Angeles Chargers. Just because of how poorly and inconsistent that the Falcons have been playing, it's hard for me to really like this team a lot or think they're a really good contender. Captain Kirk has definitely shown signs that maybe you do bench him and start their rookie quarterback. It's a shame because the Falcons paid him all that money during the offseason. Think they were going to get the Kirk Cousins from like the Washington days or his Minnesota days, but unfortunately, as players get older, they definitely regress more than they progress. So the Chargers would win 17-13, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Kirk Cousins threw a pick six, maybe even two in this game. So that was definitely the difference maker right there. So 5-0. I'm not complaining. Now, this is the game that stumped me. The Bengals played host to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought that the Bengals were going to make any noise and try to get back into a playoff position. This was a game that they had to win. Now, they were out of this game for quite some time. They made it interesting towards the end. As you can see, it definitely was, or it went down to the wire. It came down to it was a 6 point game. But don't let that fool you. I mean, the Steelers pretty much had this in the bag. Turnovers and just inconsistency from the Bengals really doomed them on this day. Then they tried a last second hurrah to get the ball back, and then Pittsburgh recovered it, and it was game over at that point. So the Steelers are red hot. I'm pretty sure they're still first in that division. And the Bengals, I believe, are 4 games below 500, but I will check the standings here in just a second. But this really felt like if you're a Bengals fan, this was a really big blow. Like you needed this win if you wanted to try to get back into a playoff position. And now if you're looking at a 4 game uh, below 500, well, you got to win your last 5 games just to finish above 500. And good luck that the other teams ahead of you are going to lose as well. So very tough loss. So this was speaking of loss, this was my first prediction that I had wrong. So we'll take a look and see at the end how I did. The AFC South had the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans. I did predict that Houston would win only because of how horrific they played the week before at home to Tennessee, and this game was close. The Jaguars could have knocked off the Texans, and it wouldn't really be saying that much. If you're barely winning over a 2 win team or a 3 win team, that says a lot about you and your team. Like, is it a coaching issue? Is it a quarterback issue? Is it other players that are playing a factor? The game should not be this close. Yes, I could argue with that, saying that division matchups, they're always going to be harder to win because obviously they're division matchups. They don't want to lose. Like the Jaguars had no intention of going into Sunday's game. Like they wanted to lose. And speaking of lose, they ended up losing Trevor Lawrence during this game. And I'm pretty sure he's going to be out for a little while, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, the Texans did win, but they narrowly won. And if they keep playing like this the rest of the season, it's hard for me to be going to be favoring them to really do much in the playoffs. It could easily be like a last year scenario where they win the wild card round but lose in the divisional round because if they're playing this poor against teams that are below 500, imagine playing against the teams like the Chiefs or the Bills, or if they have to play the Steelers, who I just talked about before. It'd be a very tough road for the Texans if they wanted to make any noise in the postseason, especially with how they've been playing this late in the year. Now, there were a couple of pretty wild finishes. I'll say this. The Minnesota Vikings, I did predict that they would get the victory over the Arizona Cardinals. It was a narrow win. I mean, 23-22, you can see how close that score really was. I'm pretty sure the Vikings were down 22-16. They came back, got the touchdown, and obviously the extra point put them up on top. And then the Cardinals tried to go down, but then Kyler Murray threw an interception, and it was game over at that point in favor of Minnesota. And they're red hot. And it's crazy to think that they got 10 wins and they're not first in that division. And I'll talk about the Packers earlier when I talked about them. I'm pretty sure they have 9 wins. So it's crazy to think that any other division, if you have 9 or 10 wins, you're guaranteed to be first in that division. But because the NFC North is so good, it's crazy. Like the Vikings and the Packers and the Lions, well, are guaranteed to all finish up with like double-digit wins. I mean, the Vikings already have double-digit wins. Detroit already does. And I guarantee Green Bay should win at least one more of their last 5 games, if not more. So that division is so tight and so close that I can easily see the top 3 teams getting into the playoffs. Now the Colts went into New England to take on the Patriots. This game I didn't think was going to be as close as it was. And the only reason the Colts won by one was because they got a late touchdown. Then they went for two instead of just the extra points. And you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Well, they got this, so you're damned if you do. We'll put it that way. So the Colts would end up converting on the 2-point conversion, getting a late win. 25-24 would be the final score. There's still a couple games below 500, and there's still a few games out of a playoff spot. But I'll check the standings here just a second, as I said before. But this is a big win for the Colts. If they're trying to narrowly keep their playoff hopes alive, this was a win that they needed to have. And who knows? Maybe if they kick the extra point, the game went into overtime, maybe New England wins. But yeah, a very gutsy call at the end of the game. I didn't think they were going to go for two, but they did, and they got it. So when you get it and it works, you get all this high praise. But when you don't, it's just like, why didn't you just kick the extra point? So, all right, the New York Jets played host to the Seattle Seahawks. I did predict that Seattle would get the win in this one, only because I have a little bit more faith in Seattle, whether it's their defense, offense, whatever it is. It just seems to be clicking at the right time. They would win 26-21. They actually trailed in this game. I think the Jets were up by like 20. They were up by at least two scores. And then Fit just hit the shan. And they're not tactically eliminated yet, but I'm pretty sure they're 3-9. And it's not, even if they were to finish the season strong, they're not even going to finish above 500. So yet another losing season is likely, or it is happening if you're a Jets fan. So again, I've said so much about the Jets and how poor they are and all the moves that they've made. There's no point in me rambling on anymore. I'll probably just lose my voice. It sounds like I'm losing my voice to begin with. All right. The Washington Commanders played host to the Tennessee Titans. The Commanders destroyed the Titans. They beat them by 23 points. 42-19 would be the final score. I thought after the Titans upset Houston, they'd be able to bring a little bit of momentum into Washington, but whatever momentum they had from the week before, definitely they left in Houston. And yeah, the Commanders rolled all over the Titans. And I'm pretty sure the Commanders, they stopped their 2-game losing streak, so I'm sure they're more than happy to have a W under their belt. Now, this was a game I thought the Panthers were going to end up stealing from the Buccaneers. And again, when it comes to division matchups, just because you have a worse record than the team you're playing against doesn't mean you can't win. I mean, the Panthers got a late touchdown. The Buccaneers ran down the field. In the little time that they had, they would kick a field goal to tie the game, send it to overtime, and then they would end up kicking a field goal again in overtime to win it 26-23. So in a game that should have ended 23-20 in favor of the Panthers, it was definite heartbreak if you were a fan of that team to see how well they played, how competitive they played, only to lose in overtime like that. Would definitely be heartbreaking if I was a Panthers fan. So a very tough loss for the Panthers, but they know their place. They know they're not making the playoffs. As with Buccaneers, this was a huge win because if I'm not mistaken, this put them back at 500, and I'm pretty sure they have the same record as the Falcons for first place in that NFC South. Speaking of the NFC South, the New Orleans Saints played host to the Los Angeles Rams. This was a game I was really flip-floppy on. I'm pretty sure when I did a video with my friend of mine last week, I said the Saints probably took the matchup, but on my paper, I did circle the Los Angeles Rams. So this game could have went either way. I wouldn't have been surprised if the Saints won, and I wouldn't have been surprised if the Rams won. The Rams would come out on top 21-14, and for a team that's also in a similar position as Tampa, where the Rams are fighting for not only a playoff spot, but possibly trying to compete for that NFC West division. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they're only a game behind the Seahawks at this point. So for the Rams, I'm just going to say this right now. If you're a Rams fan, you do not want to finish the season lose, win, lose, win, lose, win. Because if you look at their schedule, that's exactly what they've been doing. In week 12, they lost. In week 11, they won. In week 10, they lost. So it's been lose, win, lose, win, lose, win. You can't have that kind of streak going into late in the season, especially if you're trying to either get a wild card spot or be beat for a division crown. So for the Rams, a huge win. They needed this win. They got it. But now they got to keep that momentum going into week 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. The last 5 weeks are going to be very critical to see where the Rams sit at, or if they end up being on the outside looking in. Now, this is a game I watched from start to beginning, and let's put it this way, it was a tale of two halves, to say the least. The Baltimore Ravens played host to the Philadelphia Eagles. I did predict that the Ravens would win, only because they were home, and I thought after the week before they won, they'd be able to get a little bit of momentum going. In the first half, they looked completely dominant. Like the Eagles couldn't do anything. I think in the second quarter, the Eagles only had one possession, if I'm not mistaken, maybe two. So the Ravens dominated the quarter, but unfortunately, they weren't able to really do a whole lot. Outside of getting the opening touchdown to Mark Andrews, if I'm not mistaken, and the one field goal by Justin Tucker. Speaking of Justin Tucker, the guy missed an extra point and two field goals. So that's 7 points right there. So you had 7 to 19. That's 26. The Ravens easily could have won that game over the Eagles. But the Eagles are proven why they're one of the competitors in not only the NFC, but possibly a Super Bowl contender at that. They proved to myself and everyone why they're as hot as they are. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is like their 8th win in a row. I'll never forget when they started the season off like 2-2. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? Why are they playing like this? And now they're like 10-2, which is absurd. And a crazy little fact for the side for at least Lamar Jackson, he's only lost to two NFC teams, the Eagles and the Giants from 2 years ago. So it just goes to show every year it seems like he can sweep whatever NFC division he plays. But the NFC East has been the only two teams, like I said, were the Eagles and Giants that were able to get a W over Lamar and the Ravens. The Sunday night matchup was a snowstorm, to say the least, as the Buffalo Bills played host to the San Francisco 49ers. Now, pregame, if you watch the warm-up, there wasn't an ounce of snow. The field was clear. But as the game went along, it was a winter wonderland, to say the least. The Bills are used to that kind of weather. The 49ers aren't. And then you could tell there were some plays where you can see the 49ers defenders slipping and the offensive guys also slipping. So they're not used to the snow. If you're not used to the snow, you're obviously not going to play that well. And 35-10 just goes to show of how terrible the 49ers really were in this game. But you can't really fault them too much. I mean, think of all the injuries they have. And then Christian McCaffrey injured in this game, and now he's likely done for the season again. I said this when the season began, that when McCaffrey was down and he had a problem with both of his legs, you should have just sat him out the entire year. Yes, you want to have him on your team, especially if you want to try to build some momentum and hopefully get your team back into a playoff position. But the way that the 49ers have been playing lately and the losses that they've suffered, it's hard for me to really fall in love with this team or think this team has a chance to do anything, even if they get into playoffs. I think they'd be one and done because there's no way that they could catch the Seahawks for first place, I believe. I mean, yes, there's still 5 weeks left to go, and anything's possible, but just with how poorly they've been playing recently, it's hard for me to really think the 49ers are going to be that competitive moving forward. And as I said, they're injury plagued too, so you can't really do anything if key guys are out. As for the Bills, just goes to show how really good that they are this season. I've said this in most of my videos when it comes to Josh Allen. He's got a huge chip on his shoulder that he's trying to, that he has to deal with because he doesn't want to be known as just a regular season good quarterback. He wants to be known as a great quarterback and someone who can actually get stuff done in the playoffs. So I think he's really I'm sure he's loving the stats and loving the wins in the regular season, but that don't mean squat when it comes to the playoffs, because if they get that second seed or they can't catch Kansas City for the home field advantage, if they lose in the first round or lose in the second round, it's just going to feel like the last 4 or 5 years where they've made the playoffs, won a game, but then they either lost in the division round or the conference championship. So yes, it's good, always good to have a win under your belt. But with that being said, if they don't do jack squat in the playoffs, this season's going to be all for nothing. And the Monday night game was a crazy game. I watched like half of it, then I had to go into work, so wasn't able to catch the last of it. But 41-32 would be the final score in favor of the Broncos. I should have also mentioned that I did pick the Bills before, and I predicted that the Broncos would win, but I didn't think it was going to be this high of a scoring. When you have an elite defense like the Broncos do, and you give up 32 points, it's how elite really is it? Now, you can't really fault them. Jameis Winston is like a wizard when it comes to the quarterback position. He pulls out wins and he pulls out these dubs when you don't expect it. And this is a game the Browns easily could have won if it wasn't for 2 pick sixes by Winston. And I remember watching the game from like a YouTube clip, and then someone said, this was basically like a Jameis Winston game. He had almost 500 passing yards. He had a couple of touchdowns, and Jared Jeudy went off on his former team. And I'll say this: the Broncos defense got torched when it came to Jordan Jeudy. Like they didn't have a chance against their former wide receiver, and it didn't matter if the crowd was booing him, whatever the case would be. Is he was just loving every minute of it, and he embraced it. Like I said, he had over 240 yards, if I'm not mistaken, from scrimmage, and he had that long bomb as well in the second half, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure he had this calendar circled on it. I'm sure he had this game circled on his calendar from the moment he got traded and found out the schedule for the Cleveland Browns. But unfortunately, they weren't able to mount a comeback. They lost by 9 points. So big win for the Broncos heading into their Week 14 bye week. They're now sitting at 8-5, I do believe. And as for the Browns, a very tough loss. They're not out of it just yet, but we'll see where they're at with the standings wise, at least. Okay, so I will do from the division, I guess. So with their win, the Buffalo Bills have now secured their fifth straight AFC East title. They are 10-2-0. The Miami Dolphins are in second place. They have a record of 5-7-0. The New York Jets are 3-9. And after their loss on Sunday, the Patriots have now officially been eliminated from the playoffs. They are 3-10. The AFC North looks like this. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 9-3. The Baltimore Ravens, after their loss, are 8-5. The Cincinnati Bengals, off their loss, are 4-8. And the Cleveland Browns, off of their loss, are 3-9. So really the only team in the AFC North that came away with a win were the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Baltimore Ravens, they still are in a playoff position. They're still in a wild card spot. And as for the Bengals and the Browns, the season's definitely looking a little bleak if you're trying to make a run at the playoffs. The only way that Cleveland could make the playoffs would be if Cincinnati lost all the rest of their games, Cleveland won all the rest of their games, and then they'd have to hope that Baltimore also lost the remaining 4 games on their schedule. They'd have to squeeze into a playoff spot at it with an 8-9 record, and I don't see that happening. As for the Bengals, if they wanted to make the playoffs, they'd have to win out their last 5 games, finish 9-8, and hope that the Ravens can drop off and other teams in the AFC can have a worse record than that. So they're not officially eliminated, but I have a hunch that if the Cleveland loses their Week 14 matchup and Cincinnati loses their Week 14 matchup, that you can probably put an X beside their name as well. The AFC South, the Houston Texans are still on top with a record of 8-5. The Indianapolis Colts are 2 games behind Indy with a record of 6-7. The Tennessee Titans are 3-9. They're still technically alive, but I guarantee one more loss and they'll be toast. And speaking of toast, the Jacksonville Jaguars, after their tough loss to the Texans, have officially been eliminated. They are 2-10. All right, the AFC West has the Kansas City Chiefs on top of that division. Big surprise, 11-1. If they win Week 14 against the Chargers, I'm pretty sure they'll secure like their 8th or 9th or 10th straight consecutive AFC West title. It's not fair. Give some of the other teams a chance. The Los Angeles Chargers are in second place with an 8-4 record. The Denver Broncos, as I previously mentioned, they are 8-5. They are currently sitting third in the AFC East, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they're also in that 7th wildcard spot as well. And with their loss, the Las Vegas Raiders have been eliminated, just like the Jaguars. They are 2-10. All right, now we're off to the NFC, as we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who I talked about earlier. They are 10-2, still atop of that division. The Washington Commanders are 8-5 after their win. The Dallas Cowboys are 5-7, and the New York Football Giants have been officially eliminated with a 2-10 record. So Philadelphia, as I said, they're ahead of their division. If they keep up this pace, they should win out the NFC East. The Washington Commanders are in a playoff position as we speak. And as the Dallas Cowboys are 2 games back of 500, and if Washington happens to be that 7th seed, then you could almost say that Dallas is like 2.5 games behind Washington. So we'll see how Dallas does the rest of the season. If they're able to mount any kind of momentum and get a few wins under their belt, maybe they can make things interesting. But at the same time, if you do get close, but you don't get into the playoffs, was it really all worth all that hard work bumping ahead of teams? And also, with that being said, possibly affecting this upcoming draft position. The NFC North, as I talked about when I talked about, or when I mentioned about Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay, all three of those teams are very competitive, and I can see all three of those teams making the playoffs. If the playoffs started right now, all three of them would get in. Detroit would have home field advantage throughout the entire NFC side of things. They are 11-1. Minnesota's just one game behind them with a 10-2 record, and the Packers are 9-3, and they're in third place. It's crazy to think that if the Packers were in any other division, they would probably be in first place. Where in any other division, but unfortunately, it's a very crowded and very skilled NFC North. So, if I'm not mistaken, I think Minnesota has the number 5 seed, and I think that the Green Bay Packers have the number 6 seed, if I'm not mistaken. As for the Chicago Bears, they are 4-8. They're not technically eliminated, but 4 games below 500, and there's no way they can catch Minnesota because they're 6 games behind Minnesota, and there's only 5 weeks left, and they're 5 games behind the Packers, and the Packers already beat Chicago earlier in this season, so I don't see Chicago jumping into third or second place in that division. The NFC South, the Atlanta Falcons, despite the fact that they've been on a bit of a losing streak, are 6-6, still atop of that division. The Buccaneers are also 6-6, so they're breathing down the Falcons' neck. If the Falcons happen to lose their next game and say Tampa wins, then Atlanta is in big trouble, to say the least. The New Orleans Saints are 4-8, and the Carolina Panthers are 3-9, respectively. So neither of those teams have technically been eliminated, but when you're 6 games below 500 or 4 games below 500, it certainly isn't going to help your case this late in the season. And I already talked about how there's 2 teams that are guaranteed to have the number 5 and 6 wildcard spot locked in. So for the Saints, you'd have to win out the remaining of your games and hope that Atlanta and or Tampa Bay loses. And you can't have that mindset as a player or a coach or a manager. You can't have thinking, well, if this team loses and this team loses and we win, we can possibly bump them. No, just worry about you. Worry about what you can do. You can't control other teams' fates. So for the Saints and Panthers, I think that by the end of next week, or for sure by the end of week 15, they should both be eliminated from postseason action. All right. The last division I'm going to take a look at is the NFC West, as we have the Seattle Seahawks. They are 7-5, top of their division. The Arizona Cardinals are 6-6. They're in second place. The Los Angeles Rams are also 6-6. They're in third place. And after their loss to Buffalo, the San Francisco 49ers are 5-7. So not all hope is really lost for the 49ers, I guess. They're only 2 games behind Seattle for first place in that division. But if you're looking for a wild card spot, good luck. I already talked about how it's looking like it's going to be the Vikings and the Packers as the 5th and 6th seed, respectively. And after that, maybe it is maybe Carolina or maybe Arizona does get that final wild card spot, or maybe the Los Angeles Rams do get that final wild card spot, or maybe Tampa Bay gets that final wild card spot, or maybe Washington gets that final wild card spot. So there's a lot of factors into where teams are and how they'll do. As I said so many times, if you're an LA Rams fan or a Cardinals fan, yes, you're only a game back of the Seahawks, but if you lose next week, you'll possibly be 2 games behind the Seahawks, depending on how they do. And this late in the year, you don't want to be really behind the 8 ball too much because it can really ruin your season. All right, I think I'm done talking. I think I'm done. I'm done. I'm losing my voice, so I might as well cut this video off while I still can. All right, that's going to take care of Week 13's recap from the National Football League. I will have my video uploaded tomorrow for my preview of week number 14. It's just so sad that as every week goes by, we're getting closer and closer to the end of the NFL football season. But as long as my team can possibly get into a playoff position, I'll be okay with that. All right, as always, if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative. Until next time, and as always, take care.